Welcome to another edition of Ring Rachel, which just coincidentally happens to be on Budget Day, which is always one of those really key dates in the political calendar. Now, this hour you can watch on Global Player if you would like to. Rachel, welcome again.
Great to be back.
I was watching this afternoon, obviously first Jeremy Hunt and then Keir Starmer doing the response, and thinking what was going through your mind, because it must be frustrating for you as a Shadow Chancellor that you don't get to do the response to the budget.
Yes, so if it's just a statement like it was in November, then the Shadow Chancellor responds. But if it's a budget, the Leader of the Opposition responds. But, Keir and I work so closely together that we've been working on the response and going through the different announcements that we might expect over the last few weeks, to be honest. So we work very closely together. You might remember, I think it was a couple of years ago, and Keir was supposed to deliver the budget response, but then tested positive for COVID. Yes. I had a 45-minute notice, and then I had to deliver the response. But because we worked so closely together, I knew the speech inside out as well. But my job today was to make sure that there wasn't anything that the Chancellor said that we hadn't got in the speech, or that, for example, we didn't know what they were going to do on non-doms or national insurance or income tax. So some of it
I think the rest of us did.
Well, I thought they would cut income tax. I thought that was going to be the rabbit out of the hat. Usually on a budget day, they brief a load of stuff in advance and then they save until the end, and I can go further and I will do this. So we were all waiting for that. So we had to cross out in Keir's sort of speech anything about the income tax cut because it wasn't there. There was no rabbit.
Let's talk before we get to the calls, and if you'd like to give Rachel a call, it's 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp a question on that number as well. Text 84850, or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. When do you think the election is going to be? Because John Ashworth seems absolutely certain it's going to be on the 2nd of May.
Not just certain, he bet £10 against Kay Burley on Sky.
I don't bet.
I hope he hasn't bet with everyone.
I'm not going to do that with you because I don't bet.
No, I'm very fiscally responsible, so there's no betting. No betting from me, and I've got to live up to my reputation. Who knows? I thought that this budget today would be throw everything at it, but I think in the end, Conservative MPs went away quite underwhelmed, because when the Chancellor cut national insurance last year, I think the response of voters was like, fine, you've cut national insurance, but because of the fiscal drag, we're paying more in tax as we're dragged into higher tax brackets, and our council tax is going up as well. So actually, I'm no better off than I was before. In fact, I'm still worse off. And the same is true after today. If you add up the cuts in tax and then the increases in tax just on working people, on families, people are going to be at the end of this forecast period £870 worse off.
I'm sure we're going to come to this, but what's your best guess as to when the election will be? May the 2nd? A lot of people are saying November the 14th.
So I'm working on the basis of May the 2nd, and until I think the 26th of March, the election could be called. So we're working on that basis. That's what our manifesto planning, our campaign schedule looks like. And if they don't call it then, they would have bottled it, and we'll be looking at a later date.
Right, let's go to Taz in Birmingham. Taz, hi, what would you like to say?
Hi, Iain, and hi, Rachel. Thanks for taking my call. Before I say anything else, can I just say I hope the election is on May the 4th, just so I can say to you guys, May the 4th be with you.
That's a Saturday, so it probably won't be, Taz.
It's not going to be.
Yeah, that's a good line.
So, Rachel, my question for you is that I'm sure I don't have to tell you the abysmal state the public services, and in particular the NHS, is in. If you get in the next election, where will you find the money to fund the NHS and really to get it out of the hole that it's in, given that your sort of biggest tax plan, the non-dom one, has been stolen by the Tories?
They shot your fox, didn't they?
Well, it was utter humiliation for the Conservatives today, wasn't it, Iain? And Taz would have seen it as well, that the Chancellor announced the policy that we had been urging them to do for several years now, which is to get rid of the loophole whereby people can make their home in Britain and not pay their taxes here. That's wrong. And welcome the fact that they've eventually got rid of it. What took them so long? They have had 14 years, and just in this Parliament alone, I don't think there's a single Conservative MP that hasn't ridiculed the idea since we put put it forward, and now it's their flagship policy. So, I welcome a convert, and we've got a few other policies as well. If they want to properly tax the profits that the energy giants are making, if they want to put VAT on private school fees, if they want to tax private equity properly, there's still a few things that they can borrow from us if they like. But look, Taz makes an important point, because our NHS is on its knees after 14 years of Conservative government. We've got an NHS waiting list of 7.8 million, and we need an immediate injection of cash, and then we need to grow the economy so we have got money to sustainably invest in our public services. And you'll know, Taz, that we committed that we would use the non-dom money to create 2 million additional appointments in the NHS a year, 700,000 emergency dental appointments, as well as the creation of free breakfast clubs in all primary schools. The Conservatives have used that money, so that's no longer available. And so now what I will do and what my team will do is to go through all of the budget documents and identify a different way of funding the pledges we've already made. So the pledges still stand, and now I will go through every line in the documents to make sure that we can fully fund and fully cost, because I have said, and I stick with this, everything in our manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded.
You see, I was expecting you to come here tonight telling me how you would fill that gap, because if there is a May the 2nd election, you're absolutely right. It would be called on the 26th of March. Your manifesto would be published, say, a couple of weeks after that. The manifesto must be more or less written. You've had ample opportunity to look at how you would fill this gap, because this abolition of the non-dom status has been well trailed. Are you seriously telling me that you haven't got a plan now?
Well, it was only announced today,
I know,
Iain,
but you knew it was coming.
Well, no,
you
actually.
You could have been fairly certain it was
To be honest, we didn't know whether they would do it, whether they would bottle that one as well, or whether they would do a halfway house. So we weren't sure what they would announce today. And now that we've got all the documents that they've published today, we'll go through all of those,
so
and we
your
will
colleague Darren Jones
identify
said earlier this was completely anticipated. So why haven't you done the planning already?
Well, because they only announced it today. It was only been floated, I think, at the end of last week that this was first suggested. And I think you would expect me to want to do this properly. I'm not going to announce some funding stream that might unravel within 24 hours of tough questioning from Iain Dale or another presenter on LBC. I'll do this properly, make sure that we identify a sustainable and proper funding stream to fund these really important pledges. So the pledges remain, and we will now do the work to make sure that they're fully costed and fully funded for our manifesto.
The government has, in the budget today, announced another £2.5 billion for the NHS. This was going to be, I think, around £2 billion to fund more doctors and nurses. But that's not going to transform the NHS, is it? I mean, I'm sure Taz... Well, let's go back to Taz.
Yeah.
Go on.
Sorry, that was exactly what I was actually going to say, Ian. You took the words right out of my mouth.
It must have been where you were kissing me.
By this time next year, it is estimated that the NHS Trust will be roughly in £7 billion worth of debt. And that's just estimated. The reality will probably be far worse. The truth is that successive governments has cut number of beds, the staffing has been cut, funding in real terms has been cut. £2 billion, £200 million here and there is just loose change to the NHS. It's not going to make the fundamental changes that really need to be done. And Rachel, I'm sure you are a very knowledgeable and wise lady. You are aware of all these issues far, far better than I could ever be. So you know that already. The reality is, the real question is that does Labour have the backbone to talk about the real fundamental changes in the way that the NHS is funded, the NHS is structured, that these changes that are needed, does Labour have the backbone to talk about these changes and propose these changes and not be scared of losing the election, and really talk about them to the people of this country? And that really is my point, that I feel like the people in this country are tired of being treated like children, like idiots, because they just little details are being talked about, little amounts of money are being talked about when real changes are needed. People are dying.
Okay, let's get an answer from Rachel.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, £2 billion would mean 2 million additional appointments in the NHS every year, 700,000 emergency dental appointments. The number one reason for why children go to A&E now is tooth decay. So those emergency dental appointments are also incredibly important. But along with investment, we also need reform, and Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, talks passionately about that, and also about the importance of primary care and being able to see your your local GP when you need to, because otherwise the costs just stack up and up and up because people end up being admitted into hospital. So reform along with investment. But to be able to do anything, Taz, Labour's got to win the next election. And when Labour lost office in 2010, NHS waiting lists, there was just nothing like this. Things have got totally out of control after 14 years of Conservative government, and a Labour government will invest again and also reform our National Health Service.
But in all sorts of public services, people know they're not working, and they see, the Conservatives in some areas will say, well, we have put more money in, particularly to the NHS. I think the Chancellor said a third up in real terms since 2010, but it's not all about money. However, if you're going to realistically reform public services, it will take money in most of them. You've ruled out a wealth tax in the past. Isn't that now something that you ought to put back on the table, given what the Conservatives have done today?
The number one way to have the money that is needed for public services to grow the economy, and I'll just explain why that's so important. If the UK economy had have grown at the same rate of OECD economies, that's other developed economies around the world, over the last 14 years, our economy today would be £140 billion bigger. That's £5,000 for every household in the UK. And it would also crucially mean £50 billion of additional tax revenues that we'd be able to invest in our public services. So this isn't growth that is fantasy. This is growth that other similar countries have managed to generate these last 14 years. We're determined to get back to that sort of growth here in Britain because it will raise living standards and it will mean we've got the money for public services.
That won't happen immediately. And the OBR actually increased the growth forecast today for the next few years, and we are...
Well, let's just dig into that a little bit, because if you look at...
0.8% this year, 1.9% I think for the next year, 2%.
But if you look at GDP per capita, and that's the number that the Chancellor rightly said is what matters to living standards, that's actually been revised down in all but 1 year of the forecast period, and the only reason that GDP growth is positive this year is because of immigration. Because GDP per capita is falling.
Wealth tax, not putting that back on the table.
No, because we've got to generate growth, and we've got a comprehensive plan. We've drawn it up with business. We've already established in opposition a British Infrastructure Council. We've already set up the plans for the National Wealth Fund to invest alongside business, the reforms to planning to get Britain building again. I know we can grow our economy because we have worked with business to generate credible plans to do so, and then we can use that money to invest in our public services, which Taz is absolutely right. They're on their knees today, and we want to turn them round.